Hello, Rich Welsh.
Welsh.
Welsh. Rich Welsh. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Start and Pixel
Thanks for having
podcast.
me.
I think we're at number 19,
Oh, wow.
which I'm very excited about because supposedly most podcasts only ever get to episode 10.
Well, that's very good. So you've almost
So
doubled
we've
that already.
almost doubled it.
That's brilliant.
So apologies for you not being the
Number
20.
That's okay.
But
I tell you what, I'll come back for number 100.
okay.
How about
Yeah, we can do that. Or 198, maybe just before.
Oh, yeah, just before 200. Or 90, or 98.
Well, yeah, one of those two.
Yeah,
we'll
something
just
like
get you in just
99.
before, just so it's not as
No,
exciting as it could be.
99. So number 19.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's right. Yeah, no, yeah, it was cool. It's cool, eh? And I think it's the first time we're going to be shooting live in a VPod studio, which is sort of using virtual production and tech, and 3 cameras. So we've done it
Cameras
before,
everywhere.
but there are cameras everywhere. Yeah, exactly. Which is quite exciting, and it also that means I'm going to have to edit it as well, which is a bit of a pain. But
it's the price you pay for high production value.
well, that's true. Or there's this thing called AI I hear as well.
Oh, interesting.
Right, which might also be able to do something with that. So hopefully I'm going to be able to lean into that one. Although I am a bit of a Da Vinci fan, and I'm not sure how AI-ish. I know Premiere does. There's probably a plugin for that.
Be amazed.
Yeah, probably. We did everything that we didn't want to do, which was to go down and have a cup of coffee downstairs and talk about a bunch of stuff that we actually really wanted to talk about here. But maybe
Let's go back through it.
We can go back through it. Tell us all a little bit about you and what you do and how you got to the heady place that you are in now, maybe.
Yeah, well, I guess I start at the end with my current kind of roles.
Right.
So my kind of day job, my main paid employment is SVP, Head of Production Technology for Deluxe AI,
right,
which is a new part of Deluxe, focused purely on AI and data pipeline, not trying to necessarily build all the tools, although we do have a suite of tools within Deluxe, but more looking at data pipelines.
Got you.
Maybe I'll come back to that.
I was going to quickly explain who Deluxe is, because
Deluxe is actually one of the oldest post-production companies in the world. It was the first film lab out of Hollywood. In 19 they'll kill me now for knowing this. I think in 1914
he was an SVP.
I think it was 1914. Was it? Yeah, demoted. Just a VP.
Just the VP.
Yeah, so it's well over 100 years old.
Wow.
And it was one of the 2 big film labs along with Technicolor for many, many years.
Right.
And then in the 80s and 90s got a lot more into post-production and started working, in lots of areas like visual effects and so on.
Got it.
Now Deluxe is kind of back to almost its roots in that it's primarily distribution localization, making all the international versions of high-end TV shows, high-end movies for distribution around the world.
Oh, yeah, okay. Interesting. Cool.
It's a big company in the industry.
Right.
And it's evolved a lot.
Yeah.
All digital now, no film.
Got you. So it's got, everything's got to evolve, right? With technology. So that's Deluxe.
I'm also president of SIMPTY, the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers.
No small job, I imagine.
Yeah, well, luckily, I mean, in some respects, it's an elected role and it's only 2 years.
Right.
So it's quite an intense 2 years of being president. And there's a bit of a run into that as executive vice president and then a role as past president afterwards. So I am committed for 6 years to this kind of space. But effectively, I'm chairman of the board of SIMPTY globally. But yeah, my role right now is to help drive the strategy of SIMPTY. And again, SIMPTY is another organization, very old, 1916. So a little bit, not quite as old as Deluxe, but almost. And actually was born out of the standardization of 35mm film. So weirdly, the Deluxe background and the SIMPTY background, very, very similar.
Okay, interesting. Well, I was on a call yesterday with a couple of guys because we were talking about setting up an industry body for virtual production. And I said to them, I've got Richard coming on later tomorrow, and I'll ask him how he set it up. And it's like, it's a bit older than that. Okay.
And SIMPTY has a virtual production part of its work at the moment.
Yeah.
Although it's not a standalone body, but there's certainly some standards come out of SIMPTY. So SIMPTY is primarily a standards development
Got ya.
organisation, and that in of itself is a highly sort of regulated role. You can't just be a standards development organisation. So we interface with larger organisations like ISO, for instance. You've
Right.
probably seen ISO
Yeah.
standards, and usually SIMPTY standards then move into ISO and become
Got you.
ISO standards.
ISO standards, which is there's normally global standard,
And it can be
and
anything
it could
from
be anything, right?
plug sockets,
right.
mains to light fittings to project management methodologies
Right.
and things like that.
Which without standards, the world is in chaos, right? I mean,
Yes,
that's the thing.
I think so.
Yeah.
Although, a lot of people would say that we don't need standards these days, but, good luck if you pulled all the SIMPTY standards out of the current media ecosystem.
Right.
No time code, no calibration,
Right.
color would be gone. Like Rec 709. I'm guessing this podcast will be a Rec 709
Yeah,
production.
exactly.
Rec 709 is a SIMPTY standard. So,
Got you.
there are all these different things that, would be difficult without the work that's been done over those many years.
Yeah.
So that's that role.
Yeah.
I've got more. I'm also chairman of
the schools.
I'm a chairman of a startup called Volustore, which is a volumetric asset management software solution.
Right.
It's a SaaS solution.
Right.
So primarily looking at on-set scan data and managing that workflow and the assets themselves.
Oh, interesting.
Through into VFX post virtual production.
Interesting. So my Lorna runs Location Works, actually, and I was talking to her about that kind of thing. So volumetric capture, and actually the way to be able to capture some of the location so that she manages as well, and then therefore the location being able to get some sort of level of kickback on a digital
use of those scans.
Use of those scans kind of thing as well.
Digital replicas is a really interesting area. It's not a coincidence that I've got involved with a startup in that space, because I think location replicas, obviously people replicas, very big. That's a whole topic we can dive into if you want. But yeah, I mean, I got there from almost by accident, all of this, to be honest with you, which I suspect is a lot of people's story, but I wasn't intending, I never wanted to be a lumberjack as such.
Right.
Or did I? It's difficult to tell, but I wanted to be an engineer. That much I knew.
Right.
But I thought I always thought of industrial type applications like cars and bridges and those types of thing. And I didn't really see this space of media as being somewhere that you could do engineering.
Right.
But a family friend who knew what I was applying for at university had been chatting to me about the different degrees which was mostly physics, computer science, which wouldn't have been a bad one to do because everything's computers now. And she said, you should really look at a media degree. But I wanted to do engineering. So I found one of, there were, I think, 2 media technology degrees at the time. And I ended up doing one of them.
Right.
And I absolutely fell in love with the industry, the technology, the process, everything from, really script writing all the way through to
interesting
broadcast and presentation in cinema,
Yeah. Because it's an engineering feat to do it, which actually, I mean, making a film is a feat in itself, right? It's like building a skyscraper. People watch it for 2 hours and go, "Oh, I didn't really like that too much."
Yeah.
Or why was it so orange? Or they muttered a lot, and it's there's that, but you've built this effectively a skyscraper that's taken 5 years to and plus, right? Even from
and some movies are in the works for 10, 15 years easily. There was an interesting thing. My first job actually out of uni was a sound engineer.
Right.
In fact, working in these studios early on as well here in London.
Right.
So it's interesting to be back in the same studios now doing a podcast. But I was working with a mixer. He was the head mixer at Pinewood, John Hayward, and he'd worked on effectively every single Bond film at that point up to then. And he was an incredibly experienced guy, real sort of font of knowledge, very, very nice, easy to work with, but extremely experienced and knew exactly what he wanted. Definitely didn't take any shit, basically.
Right.
And at some point, as a young, wet behind the ears engineer, I said something about one of the movies we were working on, because I was like, "Well, this one feels a bit of a B movie."
Right.
And he swung round in his chair to me. It was only us in the room, thank goodness. The production weren't there as well. So he swung round in his chair,
Yep.
and he went, "It takes blood, sweat, and tears to make a terrible movie. No one sets out to make a bad movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Imagine what it takes to make a good one."
Yeah.
And he was right.
Yeah.
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 Nobody actually deliberately sets out to make a really awful piece of work.
No. No,
So,
absolutely, and it's tough, and you're right. It's like, unless my background is, as alluded to a bit earlier on, it's like big tech, Microsoft and Salesforce, and people. I only fell into this 5 years ago just by absolute circumstance, so I had no appreciation, complete naivety about the whole thing. Like most people, oh, that film's quite good, or that film was a bit rubbish, but learning how many skills there are and how people have to be on it, when you're in the set and you're shooting, and how such a small slither of actually the entire production that actually filming is. The pre-production and the post-production are like these massive things as well. It's not just
yeah.
about being on set and someone with a clapperboard.
Well, it's a challenge for the industry, and exactly in the same way that I had no idea about all these roles and processes that went into making TV and movies. This is 25 years ago when I was, embarking on my sort of university life. And
Yeah,
oh God, no, it's actually 30 years ago, which I've just realized, oh no,
it
even worse.
doesn't get short.
No, it just keeps getting further away.
I know.
But the thing is, that was a problem then. It's still a problem now. People, even like what goes into a podcast like this, it's probably a lot more than people might imagine if you're just now watching it on your laptop or
Right.
your phone,
Yeah.
thinking, oh, that looks like a couple of mics and a camera. But
Yeah.
actually, it's pretty sophisticated setup. And this is just a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
You look at what it takes to make feature film TV shows, and even YouTubers, the sort of higher end of YouTube stuff is very highly produced.
Right.
Lots of crew, cameras, scripting, pre-production,
Yep.
post-production. These are things that don't mean anything to a lot of people, because they've never been exposed to what it takes.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge if you're going to recruit. Like, where do you get your people from if they don't know what's actually happening?
Yeah. And it takes a lot in it. It does take a lot of effort. And I guess you get that. I suppose that's the thing about having that opinion about, oh, I don't like that actor, and that ruined the film for me. Whereas you don't appreciate all the years that go into it. It's the same, isn't it? You just don't, if you don't know, you don't know. So, exposing the art of the possible is important as well, right? About being able to, what goes into it, certainly the YouTube stuff, the amount of post-production and the thought that goes into it. I think someone said to me once about the most random, I think it was the Big Breakfast they were talking about, because they worked on the Big Breakfast.
Yeah.
And they said it might seem random, it is highly produced.
Yeah.
That is scripted. All the stuff that they're doing is scripted almost.
The most beautiful work often seems done in the moment and improvised, when it actually, it takes incredible amount of planning to make that work properly.
Right. Yeah.
Especially with movies as well. I think if you see any of that process, like if you start thinking, wow, the color is really, really, unless you're a professional who's sort of assessing it.
Yeah.
As a kind of lay audience person, if you're seeing something and noticing it, I think if you notice the sound mix, or if you notice the color, or you notice the acting, for bad or good,
Yeah.
you've broken that illusion.
Yeah.
And I think the best pieces just wash over you, the whole story, and you feel immersed in them.
Yeah, that's what we said about virtual production. As soon as someone realizes it's like you broke it. That's not your job. Your job is to hide it completely and make it completely immersive.
And I think when you get that past the professional eye as well, it's even better.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
When we saw each other last week, we saw some clips from Fallout.
Yes.
And
right.
there was some shots in there. I loved Fallout, one of my favorite current shows that I really got into it. And there was some shots in there that I hadn't realized were virtual production. I just thought they were very large sets.
Right.
And it makes total sense to me. Like, intuitively, I should know, why would they build that massive set for that one shot? Because there was only one scene in this particular location. but I never questioned it when I saw the show. I was just in the story, and that's how it should be. The technology, and I think this was drummed into me a lot as when I was early in my career, and particularly at university, that the technology should fall into the background.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be apparent. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the challenges with AI at the moment. I'm getting quite like, I can see it. I'm almost like, oh, that's that model.
Yeah.
That's weird.
I think, yeah,
Um,
I mean, have been blessed working for big tech and seeing sort of this evolve. My first job really for Scion, they didn't have email. Email
yeah.
really hadn't been existing. There was a thing called Kicks, and you get InfoServe. So I would go to a guy in the support desk to email an InfoServe account in the US.
Oh,
That was
right.
it.
Okay.
And
That's
this
how
was
you
in
did it.
this was 93, 94, maybe, literally one
Okay.
person. Then they got CC Mail, which was an internal thing, and then it sort of turned it on for external. So sort of, I've seen this progression of these, people queuing up outside overnight for operating systems. I mean, who would have thought, and
Oh,
people used to do it, right?
those are the
Same,
days.
same with phones. People used to queue for phone, the
Yeah.
flip
Yeah.
phones, with the
Yeah.
ones Blackberries, all those kinds of things. People would get very, very excited about it, and also you'd get these new technology bumps, things like cloud. When it was when cloud came in, 2009, 10, 11, around that.
Yeah.
Cloud this, cloud that, cloud
Yeah.
infrastructure.
Yeah.
You remember seeing the ads all over the place. No one had a clue what it was, but it was this sort of thing that everyone then started talking about. And of course, everything's cloud computing,
Yeah.
but it's gone as a thing.
Yeah. That's another interesting kind of part of, I mean, it's true in most industries, but certainly in media industry, you see it a lot when you go to trade shows.
Yeah,
There's whatever the buzz is at the time, and then it falls into the background. I think cloud's a great example. Everything 3 or 4 years ago, if there wasn't some sort of mention of cloud
right.
on your stand at a big industry show like NAB in Vegas or IBC in Amsterdam, then you were somehow like,
Right.
oh, you're not doing cloud.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, but I think people don't appreciate how much these things pervade their lives.
Yeah.
It's true with AI. It's been in use for a lot of functions for a long time.
Yep.
Now we've got awareness. Of course, everybody wants to jump on that bandwagon from a kind of selling their product point of view, which is, understandable
Yeah.
because you've got to stay relevant. But on the other hand, a lot of people are questioning the technology. And that happened again with all the other technologies, any
But
automation,
yeah.
cloud, whatever.
So cloud, yeah. There was the biggest thing about cloud was where the data was going to live, because it was your data,
Yeah.
and then you had the
Data
EU,
sovereignty.
even sovereignty.
Yeah.
Is it going to be so? What the US are going to have my personal data? What if they get access to it? What about if this where it sits? Germany is very, very conscious about where they store data, so it was all
Yeah.
about that kind of thing, and hacking and all those kinds of things. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. So until those things, either people get bored of talking about them, or they actually just get fixed, and half the time it sort of gets fixed.
Yeah. And there's almost always a way to get around, like if there's a challenge there. I mean, that's what the engineering's about, right?
Right.
Um, my my background before Deluxe is that I had a startup which Deluxe ended up acquiring, and that
Right.
was primarily around cloud automation for certain parts of the media processing pipeline.
Right.
And we were working on high-end feature film. Actually, was the biggest use case, which is sometimes referred to as tier 1 or tier 0 even content. So it's
Oh,
it's from a security point of view. I know
who knew?
well, there
Who
was
knew?
always tier 1, and they realized they needed another
Another.
level of security, so they could only go to 0 because
Right.
tier 2 was like down.
Right.
So
That was just like thumb drives.
it's a
Kind of.
bit like final
Yes.
in the file name.
Yeah.
Last one definitely.
Definitely
V2.
final. Yeah.
V2.3. So yeah, I was sort of exposed to that exact challenge, which was that Hollywood in the very early 2010s
Right.
was saying, no, we'll never do cloud because it's not secure.
Oh yeah.
And then, I think the first place where high-end feature films was actively going into the cloud on a regular basis was VFX, because they required all this render power.
Right.
And there wasn't really a VFX house anywhere that had enough to just freely give that to anybody who needed
Right.
to render. So at some point there's this sort of level of render power that is the right amount commercially, that you've mostly full and it's paying for
Right.
itself. And after that, what do? Well, you go to another VFX house, probably the competition,
Right.
to render a certain load of stuff. Don't really want to do that. And some of the VFX houses had cottoned onto this. I think the mill were very early on bursting into the cloud.
Right.
They were working with advertising, but the first I heard of it was actually Lucasfilm using cloud for rendering on one of the upcoming Star Wars movies.
Right.
And I was like, whoa, I mean, that's like super sensitive. The difference, I think, from the studio's point of view is that the production are only producing a bit of the movie, and it may be a bit that doesn't even see the light of day, maybe
Right.
doesn't even make the cut. Whereas if you're doing that at the very end of the process, you've got the crown jewels, you've got the finished article,
Yeah.
pre-release, perfect uncompressed copy. That's the one that they really, really were worried about going into the cloud.
Got you.
And so even when people say blanket, oh, I don't want to do this because of that, they don't really mean that. I think they're thinking about specifics.
Well, it's fear, isn't it? That's the thing. It's fear. And once it's done, as you say, you know, it's done. The irony is that it's way more secure putting stuff on cloud, right? Way more secure now.
Yeah.
I mean, even probably then, it was, you know, Microsoft did not get into, Amazon did not get into it to build an infrastructure that people would be able to get into.
No, and they deal with much more secure content than
right. Health records,
you know, yeah,
all
exactly.
sorts of things.
Pharmaceutical,
Nuclear
trade
bombs.
secrets. Well, those are in a separate cloud. There's a gov cloud.
There's a gov cloud, exactly. I know of such things.
I'm pretty sure the nuclear codes aren't in there. I really hope that.
Oh yeah, they're in a little box somewhere.
But financial data, I mean, you think about your financial data, and things do go wrong with that as well.
Yeah.
But you don't want that just being freely available. Right. But that lives in the cloud.
Yeah. Well, that's banks crash, right? Banks would disappear overnight if they sort of someone was be able to get into it. Yeah. For sure, they spend an awful lot of money and time, making sure.
So I've never been worried about the infrastructure with cloud.
No.
I think what you build around it for yourself is a different challenge. Really. And of course, they absolve themselves of the responsibility for your own security.
Yeah,
the cloud providers, then they're pretty smart. They provide security to this layer, but all of your application lives up here.
Yeah,
and you're responsible for the security there, which I think is right.
Yeah, otherwise you'd sue them, right? If you cocked up.
On that score, what do you think about the kind of indemnities that the big tech providers are kind of putting in place for AI? I mean, specifically around things like copyright infringement.
So, I mean, I don't know, to be honest with you. It's a very good question. I don't. In my head, when I sort of first saw it as a problem, I just looked at it and thought to myself, that'll have to just go through litigation, and they'll have to work through that process. And the courts will have to work that out, because everyone's going to fight their battles, right? And it's like, you can say it's mine, you can say it's somebody else's. It's going to have to go to litigation, and somebody else is going to sort it out.
I think there's interesting layers to this, where at the moment the big tech companies are sort of actively lobbying governments to remove copyright protection for training AI.
Yeah,
on the basis that you and I could go and spend a day in an art gallery, go and look at all the artwork, then learn all of those styles, and then paint a painting. And
like going to university.
Yeah, exactly. And somehow AI is exactly the same.
Right.
I don't personally subscribe to that, because it's industrialization of that process, which I don't think is the same. That's a bit like being able to go and photocopy the paintings rather than take the pictures and feed them in and mash them together. But I'm not sure it is the same argument. Having said that, you're right. The litigation is starting to happen now, and we're seeing studios and content owners. So content owners on the kind of corporate level, but even individuals, musicians and artists, actors and so on, starting to litigate, regardless of what the current copyright law is, about their likeness being stolen, or their artistic work being stolen to train AI models.
And I wonder what they're training, the idea of training them for is anyway. So as my view of AI is like there is that creative part of it where you say, tappy tap tap, and you go, can you do a dog eating I don't know, a zombie?
That's my
With a
favorite
I know, right? You
prompt,
can do that,
actually.
but I use it constantly just to go. And I was doing it just before you came in. I think I asked it. Um, I don't know, something like, what does SIMPTY stand for? Right,
Well, yeah.
right. So something
Was
like
it
that.
correct?
I don't know. To be honest. I think so. What does rich Welsh do? Um, but and that's what I use. So it's productivity versus creative, and
Yeah,
I sort of
absolutely.
see it through the lens of power. Sort a little bit like Office, Microsoft Office. It's a productivity tool, right? You got emails, and you've got all these are Visio, and you got PowerPoint, and you got Word, and they're all great for that period of time. But people used to do Word or art in PowerPoint,
Yeah,
right? You'd create these. They'd use these particular tools that were never designed to do artistic stuff, and they'd do art on it, and it was never any good. But it was sort of using that tool, and that's where my head is at. These are such brilliant productivity tools. It's going to go off and do really clever stuff and automate things
yeah.
that were, but I just can't see it really. And if it does, it'll, I think it have sort of knock on effects of being able to really have that creative way, that creative output. And one of the things I sort of think about is this conversations like we're having now, right? So this is a human conversation where people want to have realistic, authentic understanding of between two individuals, and that is almost, and it must be actually probably almost actually impossible to get an AI to do this, to have the right inferences and going off in those tangents that two humans or three or four humans can do over a long period of time. I'd find that really, really difficult for that to be created versus
Yeah, I
us to
think
do it, sort of just do it.
yeah, I think there's a discovery process which is part of being human and being creative that is about finding something new. And if AI, current, let's say generation AI, is really about pattern recognition and then inferring or synthesizing outputs from that, and effectively this is like, if I did this, the next thing I would do would be this, and so on, and then inferring from that some sort of creative output, but it's
Yeah,
always synthesized from all of the input that came in the first place. Whereas I think real sort of cutting edge creativity and the creative process is more about discovery of new things.
yeah. Well, actually, your analogy of going into, if we went into an art gallery and just looked at it and then painted a picture, well, that's not creativity. That's taking inspiration maybe and understanding
Yeah.
light more. You've still, if you're driven to be an artist, you will still create your own output.
Yeah, and how do you figure out what you do? You go on a bus ride and listen to music before you do your oil painting, and you might do, or you
Yeah,
go traveling, or you spend time chatting to friends, or you go and spend time in nature, or whatever. But you're doing things that have nothing specifically to do with
right.
that final process of a brush and the canvas,
Yeah,
but your whole human experience is going into that
yeah,
rather than, an AI trained on image generation now is really trained on images and descriptions of those images. Those descriptions do not include, and the photographer was going through a particularly difficult time in their life when they took this photo,
right.
and they'd ended up in a war zone by accident and taken this incredible picture,
Yeah,
and it captured the humanity of the people in the subjects in the picture and also the photographer at that moment.
yeah,
That is not in the description on the whole of the image that gets pushed into the AI.
yeah,
So how could it understand that?
yeah. I
And they
see.
don't understand
And
it anyway.
yeah, I mean, if you look at it through the lens of the big tech companies, they are looking for revenue from this. And if it's, Microsoft had its sort of fingers in so many different pies, Xbox, gaming, online advertising, office productivity tools, operating systems, clouds. It had so many sort of different fingers in different pies. Um, but they're always because they were looking for revenue models, right? And
Right.
it's like, and you can sort of see, okay, in a room, you can I can really understand that it's now possible for a plumber who's based in Berkhamsted in Hertfordshire to create a very compelling ad to advertise his business, right? Really,
Yeah.
really simply using Wix or so, some other website thing, or any some sort of tool. He's now capable of about being relevant within that ecosystem
Yeah.
by just pushing a few buttons, subscribing, and it might even be just added value, and suddenly he's got great Facebook advertising.
Hmm.
Now, he would have, previous to this world, he would have either had to have learned how to use Canva, before that Photoshop, or got an agency, and that the price sensitivity of his business meant that he couldn't do that. You'd either go to, back in the day, you'd go down to the pub and everything was word of mouth to be getting more business, but that's far less relevant now. So I can see this sort of it really filling that kind of gap, that image generation, that you could go, okay, I'm a plumber.
Yeah.
I want to inspire people that I'm a really good,
Yeah.
honest guy, and I'm living in Berkhamsted, and suddenly you've got these great images that you can,
Yeah.
and it will rotate them, and it will probably do A/B testing on the fly and do all sorts of things that means that it's optimized, that he'll get business from it. Brilliant. But I can't sort of really see it being elevated above that kind of.
I I think it does have a place in the more traditional filmmaking, television production pipeline, but I think it's more around efficiency
Right.
and actually taking some of the drudgery out of it. I think you said earlier, you may use an AI tool to help you edit this. Well, like, why not? Because really, it's a
Yeah.
3-camera setup.
Yeah.
Pretty much, you want, when we're both talking, the wide shot when one of us is talking, and occasionally cut back to both of us while one of us is talking and the other's reacting.
Reacting shot. Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but that's, yes, there's creativity that goes into that from an editorial process, but for you, that's 60 minutes of
Right.
content that you now may spend a whole day editing, really maybe not bringing much extra to it.
And it wouldn't, and that actually goes, that sort of aligns with what I mean about the plumber from Berkhamsted, is that the efficiency tool, but it has very, to your point, it adds very little to, if I spend an entire day on it, it's not even an 80/20 rule, right? It's like even the 90/10.
Yeah.
It's like going to give me if I spend all day doing it, it'll make it look 10% better, if that kind of.
So I think if you wanted to see an area, for instance, that you scale that to, a production level, like a high-end feature film.
Yep.
So let's say a big superhero franchise, and you've now got like an assistant editor trawling through to find the shots of a particular character
Right.
from that day's footage. And it might be, especially depending on the environment, let's say it was mocap, actually be an interesting one, right?
Right.
With mocap, you'll run a whole load of cameras in a room, and you will actually quite often just run them all day, because why not? You don't want to miss anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you just run them, and then you go find your hero shots that you want from
Yep.
that mocap. Well, actually, you could say, I want that particular person. Well, if you can quickly give some images of that person to the AI and say, give me back all the sessions
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
person in, that takes all that boring work away. They don't want to do that. They want to get down to the business of choosing the best take,
Yeah.
and even better, what if the AI then gives you the ranked best takes? How it does that is a different question, but if it
Right.
can do that, if you were, similarly wanting to produce a trailer from, or some promotional material
Right.
from something, and you're like, give me all of the shots of this particular superhero from all the footage I've got. And actually, what I'd love is if you can give me some behind the scenes stuff, not the main shots, so I can put together a little kind of,
Yeah.
like a
Or
kind of a
100,
behind the scenes piece.
or even 100 of them. Interestingly, episode 15, 16 of the Starting Pixel podcast, we had Andrea from Italy, and they've developed something really similar, but for the broadcast industry, where you just basically load your entire back catalogue of content into it,
Right.
and you can just ask it, this person laughing, put all the prompts
Right.
that you
Right.
need to
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
do,
And
and it
it'll
will
go
just
find it.
literally go
Yeah.
find it.
These
It's
are
the
very simple use cases that obviously enhance
But yeah,
productivity. So
right,
why not? So I think if you blanket say we don't want to use AI in the creative process, you're probably missing
right,
something, because it's a bit like saying I don't want to use Word in my writing process
yeah,
because I prefer to use a quill,
yeah.
but maybe a
Which is
bit
which is
quicker at
great.
iterating if I
And
can
that,
type.
yeah, I mean, that's a typical tech adoption curve. You will get
Challenge.
laggards, and
Yeah.
you are going to get bleeding edge people, getting and jumping onto the bandwagon, making all the mistakes for everyone else
I
to
think
take advantage of.
one of the interesting flip sides to that is that people, coming back to what you were saying about data sovereignty earlier,
Yeah,
you know, most of these AI tools, particularly the heavy lifting ones, do live in the cloud, really, because to run them locally, you need an extremely powerful machine, and
right.
even then it's slow.
Yeah,
A lot of the inference stuff around LLMs and image generation couldn't be done on your local machine at any level of
right.
scale.
Yeah, yeah,
So unless you're prepared to have extremely powerful desktop computers and more than one, and or like a whole server farm on prem, you're going to be doing that in the cloud. Now, when you push your data up, how sure are you that your data is safe and it hasn't been used to enhance that product? And quite often it's actually in the terms
yeah.
and conditions of using the product. And this is where I think there's a couple of really interesting kind of areas to explore. One is, what are people who really have what they consider to be high value IP doing? We're seeing contracts coming out of the big studios that say, no, you cannot train any
Anything,
kind of
right?
machine learning, you know, blanket on our content. But then under the covers, maybe they're doing deals to sell that content.
Right.
If you look at Lionsgate and the Runway deal, that's an interesting one, where they, Lionsgate sort of gave the rights to, or sold the rights to Runway to train on their catalogue.
Right. Interesting. And they could, yeah, and then Disney did a Christmas ad completely on,
Using generative
yeah,
AI.
Coke. No, Coke.
Coke,
Coke.
not Disney.
Not
Yeah,
Disney.
Coke.
Coke.
Yeah, yeah.
They
I
used.
mean, I think there's some great work coming out of pure generative AI stuff. There's a great one worth going and looking at called Mandingo, which is the video for the latest Wu-Tang
Right.
song. And I loved that, actually, because it's very atmospheric. It's good stylistically. It's
Yeah.
got a lot of coherence. There are still problems in there. If you know what you're looking for, there are generative AI video
Yeah.
problems. But if you're just the average audience member watching it, it really works with the video. It's great. I loved it, actually. So there is that. But if you took that apart as like a piece, even if it was like a trailer for a Hollywood movie, there's no way a trailer department at Warner Brothers or Disney or Sony would let that out the door, because there's too many problems with it.
Got you.
And they would be like, no, we need to fix these bits. Like, go fix that shot, redo that. There's loads of stuff in there. And I think when you get to that level of content, it's a very different kettle of fish.
I'm just checking.
The time.
Everything's still running. And
Oh yeah, we're
no,
still recording.
making sure we're still recording. Hold on. I'm just making sure we've got enough time on the.
Okay,
We've got another 26 minutes to go,
cool.
which is plenty. I might cut this bit out.
Yeah.
I might.
No. You should definitely leave. This is the sort of behind the scenes thing. We should have
Right.
turned one of the cameras round.
Yeah, yeah.
So people could see what was going
See
on.
the audience of 50
Yeah.
50 or 60 people we've got, and who are very, very quiet.
Yeah, they're very well behaved,
They
actually.
are
I'm
very well
surprised at this
behaved.
audience.
Right. So what did I say? I said 20 minutes.
26.
26. All right. So if I set this for 20, no, not 20 hours. That'd be stupid. So we got 20 minutes to go. Okay. There we go. That's better now.
So
now I'm not panicking about pushing that. And as long as you can still see the three pictures behind us, that's good.
I can only see two because of that light, but yeah.
I can't move it now. Anyway, just because you know what Unreal can be like. It can just decide to crash.
Oh, okay.
Just randomly.
Is this Unreal?
It is. Yeah.
It's everywhere.
It's a bit of it, yeah. And there's no BTS as well for this. So maybe I have to take a picture on the iPhone just to lift the curtain on
that would be great, actually,
on the environment
afterwards. I think that's an interesting point, actually, just to take another sidetrack, is the fact that we're sitting here in a virtual studio and you're running Unreal, which is high-end production tool. I mean, it's a game engine for people
Right.
who don't know. It's one of the two most popular game engines out
Yep.
there, and lots of highly popular games. Fortnite is an Unreal
Right.
game. In fact, Unreal comes from the same people who build Fortnite.
Yep.
And it's used in virtual production on all sorts of high-end stuff like Star Wars and Doctor Who
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
on. The Fallout, as I mentioned earlier, which is great.
Yep.
Plug it
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
And here we are using that same tool in a podcast studio. And I think this is interesting, actually. People talk about democratizing filmmaking or
Right.
TV production or music making and so on, and the technology has done that. And I think that is absolutely true
Yep.
in many ways. It has brought professional tools within reach of the consumer.
Yep.
And interestingly as well, I think what had previously been considered to be, let's say, prosumer or even consumer tools have gone the other way into professional production.
Yeah.
We saw a lot of, the upcoming Danny Boyle movie is being shot on iPhone, some of it, because that's the look he wants.
Right.
Well,
it is. Yeah. I mean, there is and that again sort of goes back to my world of big tech. Is like things get cheaper, easier to use, and faster. I mean, that is what tech. That's what capitalism or commercialism does, right? It's like you're looking for features that people will get you an edge over your competition, which is normally better, right? Smaller and better and faster, and it works. And so we've now got cameras that literally are a tenth of the size of a camera even a few years ago pointing at us. Like these microphones, again, these would have been thousands of pounds not that long ago.
Yeah. But then able to manufacture them at scale because more people want them. I mean, microphones didn't get cheaper because the technology itself changed. It's because they just manufacture more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same with cameras, actually. The chips in cameras have got cheaper as a result of the fabrication plants churning out chips for phones.
Yeah.
And then being able to obviously make bigger chips or sensors for the cameras, for the higher end cameras. But the point is that whole fabrication process is lower cost now than it used to be.
Yeah.
Which facilitates, that kind of point of entry. I think what's interesting, just coming back to what we were talking about earlier, and you were saying about the plumber creating his advert, or his webpage for his plumbing business. Whereas before, to do that, you'd have had to go to a creative agency, get stock footage, make stock video, know about editing, all these things.
Yeah.
Yes, anyone could do that, but all that we've really done there is raise the bar for entry for plumbers. What we haven't done is bring Hollywood down to that level. I think, there's so much content now.
Yeah. And I think, and also the accessibility, and we were talking about, and actually the rest is entertainment. Today we're talking about this really short form micro dramas or verticals, these vertical dramas, which production values aren't great, but people watch them, and that's the thing. It's a big business now.
And the production value is good enough, I would say, with this. I think it's interesting. Actually, I was talking to a friend about verticals a little while ago, and so I'm kind of partly more from a business background these days, as well as technology and production. I had talked to this person previously about investment and stuff. I thought he was talking about different industries when he said verticals.
Right.
And for 2 days,
yes,
we were talking about totally different things. And eventually I was like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And he goes, like vertical on the phone screen dramas.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I thought you meant different industries within the technology space. Okay, that makes a lot more sense now.
Brilliant.
My mind was blown how much that market is worth. And this is a really interesting space.
Yeah.
Then, individual productions costing hundreds, maybe even tens of thousands, making millions.
Yeah.
And like you said, the production quality, it's not like rock bottom production quality. It's just not what we consider like, grade A high-end production quality.
And there's that difference between those two things as well. And it's watched on a phone, mobile device, so it doesn't need to be massive. The shot block is vertical, so
That's actually really useful.
which is really useful because it obscures the majority of the
Yeah.
background. If you're trying to get a two, you can only the widest you could do is two people standing quite close to each
Yeah, yeah,
other.
yeah.
So it hides a not really hides, but by accident, I guess it hides
It
a lot of
reduces the set challenges and so on.
yeah.
And again, these productions probably I don't know how many of them use virtual production. I'd be interested to know. But again, like even then, a virtual production stage wouldn't have to be very large because you've got a very small
Right.
kind of.
I literally walked out. So we shot something 2 years ago. I sent you the videos actually. I was convinced, it's a bit like why I set up this podcast studio. I was convinced that virtual production had a place, but it hadn't been invented yet. Because it was a fix for it was a very it was a big engineering fix for a problem we had with the COVID, and broadcasters have been doing it for years and years and years with green screens and weather reports, and it's got quite big with sports and stuff like that. But I thought to my when I first saw it, the naivety was, well, why would you film it any other way? I couldn't work it out. This is the gift that keeps on giving. I can change the background. I can do all this kind
Yeah,
of stuff. We can control all of the stuff that people talk about when it comes to virtual production, which is that. So a couple of years ago, we got to film something because I had access to this studio, green screen studio, and 3 motion track cameras with Moses star trackers on them. And I said, no, I am convinced it's going to be a vertical format. So we shot blocked everything to a vertical format, and we wrote 5 really short 30-second sketches within a PR agency that had a little bit of a sort of a spin on VP. But it absolutely worked. And the thing was, so I think we had four or five actors, um, different scenarios. Ben Keaton, who's a great actor, a writer. He was on Father Ted and he'd done loads and loads of things. He wrote the scripts, and we filmed all 5 of them in a short day.
yeah, that's
Short
cool.
day.
Yeah, yeah.
We had one. We had a
Different
we had a we
locations.
had a hand. We had a handheld
Yeah,
camera. So someone had a steady cam, and we shot them around the office building, the virtual office building, and just found the right angle, just like you would do probably for short reels, right? You just
yeah, yeah.
go to a location and try and find the right background kind of thing, and the right lighting.
Yeah, I think that's the balance, isn't it? If everything's going to be like out of focus backgrounds, you probably do whatever you like actually, and you can
Right.
get away with a lot in virtual production in
Yeah.
that in those kind of mid shots with nice depth of field. Then yeah, easy. I think if you think about going back to these verticals, if you want to do a period drama and you think you can shoot in one day at a National Trust property or
Right.
something, it's probably as easy to go to that National Trust property and shoot because
Right.
now you don't have to do all that heavy lift up front of building all those backgrounds in high detail. And if
Right.
you know that stuff's going to be in focus, you can't get away with like
Yeah.
a quick background. You
Yeah.
have to do some pretty decent level
Yeah.
of VFX work up front. And I think that was where I saw a lot of the challenges with the Hollywood level virtual production. Once those stages had been built, a lot of them around COVID, as you mentioned, and afterwards, when there was still quite a lot of production work happening like that, where the idea was, okay, well, you don't have to fly your crew to a
Right.
location, etc. But then actually you start looking at, well, I need to do all my VFX work up front.
Yeah.
Now I'm committed to that background.
Yeah.
In film, we've worked for years with, green screen and, whatever.
Yeah.
So obviously, because a lot of shots just couldn't be done, right?
Yeah.
And you had to VFX stuff in afterwards. I think, now you can do some of that up front and you can get that performance maybe is better because the actor is performing to, the environment that they're meant to be in
Yeah.
and so on. But the flip side of that is, you've got it's in camera. So that you sort of, unless you're going to comp it out or roto it out,
And
comp
then
something else in,
right.
which is a bit more of a lift than just doing it against a green screen or whatever. So there's definitely a lot of balance in there of like, what should you do and what shouldn't you do?
Yeah.
Um,
But I think the interesting thing about, if you bring in that sort of either green screen or LED wall, use of it in something in a production value that the vertical formats play to, which is you don't need a floor set. right?
Yeah.
So you don't need to build a soft floor set. You could do a location scan
Yeah.
if you wanted to, and that doesn't take too long to do. But it opens up that sort of also the possibilities of having 5 different locations in one
Yeah.
series, right? So now, as soon as it probably makes financial sense to go to a period drama, and if you're going to go to one location, a really nice one, that's you're locked into that, right? As
Yeah.
soon
Yeah.
as you go, if you've got 2, doesn't make financial sense
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas if something using VP, you could then just go to 5 different locations. And what it also leans into is horror and sci-fi,
Right.
because those 2 things you'd have to normally traditionally build a set,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So, you can lean into those kinds of things. And then actually that just opens a huge, opportunity to create different content rather than you're going to be shooting it on a lawn in someone's garden, because that's they can only write that type of content because that's the only location you can really shoot in,
Yeah.
because it has to be really cheap.
And those are actually interestingly, two genres that perform very well, particularly horror.
Yeah,
It's a very, very sort of high return on investment for
right.
horror.
Yeah, there's what's the Scutter, something like that. There's a streaming service now that just does
Just
horror.
horror. Okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
I mean, again,
huge volume.
I'm interested in. You've convinced me almost that I should go into making horror verticals, because
I
it feels
reckon
like it's good. You don't have to go anywhere. Just do
jump
it in here.
right, jump scares. I think they talk about they're always a cliffhanger. They're only 2 minutes long, and there's a cliffhanger literally at the end of every single one to try and
Yeah,
get you
yeah,
in.
yeah.
So if you can write it in a way that there's a cliffhanger
Every
at
2
every
minutes.
two or three
Yeah, yeah.
minutes,
Yeah, that was talking to a friend of mine who's an actor, and she was saying she does a lot of these verticals, and she's trying to explain to me this idea there's a cliffhanger every 2
yeah.
minutes, and I'm like, oh, it must be so like tiring to watch this,
But
but it's not.
that's the reverse look, I guess, isn't it? All that kind of stuff.
I don't know, but it's incredibly. It's interesting as well. If you look at the sort of, you've got like high end Hollywood stuff and streaming production and so on, these big shows, big episodic
Right.
shows, big feature films up there with the huge budgets, and to break into that space is quite hard. And then at the other end, we've got YouTube, where anyone can make a YouTube video.
Well, yeah.
And this seems to sit very firmly in the middle
Right.
now.
I drew a graph and I did a presentation exactly that, where you had basically running along the bottom access to technology, and then the up axis was production value, right? So you had a 0 in the corner, which was a web camera, because it had no rubbish production value, and it was easy. Everyone has a web camera, right?
Yeah.
Or an iPhone. And then you go all the way along to the top, high production value, very limited access to technology. You've got the BBC and Netflix and the big techs. And anything in between really is challenging. Really, really challenging. Corporate videos maybe. But it's like, and then I looked at it, I thought, okay, well, where's the growth going to be to fill this void? Because it was, there's a lot of content comes out at the top end, huge amounts of content, probably by a factor of 1 million times more content.
Unconsumable amounts of content
in the bottom.
Yeah.
But there was, as you said, it's like there's this big void in the middle. It's like, and where's that going to be filled from? Is it going to be filled from the industry that is prides itself on high quality, putting out amazing and spending a huge amount of money to try and get this stuff right, and is struggling because of all the things that have been happened since COVID? Or is it going to come from this really low quality production value with limited good access to technology, but they don't know how to produce content? And then I thought to myself, well, it's likely to come from here, and that's reason being is that things get cheaper, easier, and faster, faster. But it'll be for commercial reasons. You'll get the likes of, and I used to use Mr. Beast as a great example, actually. It's like, but there's a triangle of content creators, and Mr. Beast is probably at that pinnacle, right? But then you've got a layer of people who make a good living, and they're smart people who are making content. Then you've got a layer of people who make a good living and they're having a laugh. And then suddenly they'll find out that one day the phone stops ringing, kind of thing. And then you've got just people on the bottom who just like making content for the giggles, right? So if you look at that top section of that thing, they're going to get into a competitive leap of going, we have to create better content. We need more formats. We need, if I'm going to be, earning this amount of money to pay, and I'm going to have to take on producers, I'm going to have to do this. And that's the place where it sort of starts to go. New formats like vertical
Yeah, I think that's an
dramas come
interesting.
out.
Well, I mean, the format one that's sort of like almost a no-brainer, but it like so many great commercial successes, it's so obvious that no one thought of it.
Right.
And
Right.
I think that is filling that
Ooh.
gap. I think what's also interesting is that exactly as you're saying, like where the further up that triangle you go, the more you have to think about what is it that puts me at the top of that triangle.
Exactly right.
And actually it almost comes back to your other graph, the sort of access to the technology part, because really what YouTubers, the best YouTubers do that differentiates themselves is high production value.
Yeah.
And the verticals sort of sit in that place of decent production value. They're made like normal movies and shows. They have proper camera dollies and things. They're not completely like,
Yeah.
slapdash done on an iPhone handheld and so on. They are shot like a real movie. They're just done very quickly, quick turnaround script, quick turnaround
Right.
pre-production. But they're done like a normal TV show or film production, just very compressed timescales on a very low budget. But the point is that, like, for those high-end YouTubers, well, like Mr. Beast, he has a huge production team around him,
Right.
and it costs a lot, and also he suffers failures as well as the successes that come with doing those
Right.
high-risk, high-budget productions.
Yeah. So he's well known that he plows a huge amount of money back into it. But I think the other thing about it that occurred to me was it's incredibly brutal. You turn off that tap if you're not on your A game.
Yeah.
Constantly, then you're going to be looking at your revenue income and be looking at it going, I've got to do something better. I've got to keep churning.
Yeah. I don't think you can do it on any one hook either. Like just having better production and better quality doesn't really help.
No.
If you've come from that background, you've got to retain that authenticity because that's what your audience built on in the first place.
Right.
When you look at really high end, like superhero movies, again, as an example, that's very escapist. Authenticity in some respects is not what you're looking for from that.
Yeah.
You're looking for good performances from the actors. That will make a difference. But again, this is all production value.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think trying to marry the two is a really interesting challenge.
We've got 1 minute 30.
Have we?
Yeah.
What are we going to do to wrap this lot up?
I don't know then. We're probably going to have to do another one.
Yeah.
Do another one.
That was a very wide-ranging conversation.
Yeah, it was good.
I think the future's bright. I think that's what I see. With all this technology, I think, the hardware, you're just talking about the way cameras are getting better and the form factors smaller and so on. And it's bringing it within reach of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do think AI plays a pretty big part in that. It's yet to play out how it will work at those different phases. I think we'll see a lot of it actually in the higher end YouTube and verticals space.
Yeah.
Augmenting that content because it's a low budget way of doing that.
Yeah. And it's learned stuff that people, there's a lot of data that comes in from, where you typically see a drop off of viewership at 20 minutes. How do people who don't see that drop off achieve the non-drop off? And they'll learn from that kind of stuff. And then that will go into the automatic, you won't even have to think about it because the algorithm will do it for you, right? It'll find those.
But you won't make your next franchise feature film that way, I don't think at all.
No.
But AI will pervade the whole process and make it more efficient.
And then it will stop being called AI. It'll just be.
I know. I do.
That's the other thing.
I look forward to the day that it's just another tool.
It's just the thing.
I'll leave you this thought.
Go on.
Someone sent me a message from a big trade show that they're at right now.
Right.
And they said there are a lot of consultants there who are claiming to be AI first consultants. And they were like, oh, I'm so fed up with it. And it's like being a Microsoft Word first consultant. It should just be another tool.
Yep. But people buy it. That's the really interesting thing about it. Systems, I've seen a lot of that kind of stuff. Rich, it was so good to chat. We literally could have gone on for hours. It's just the memory cards.
We'll have to do it for number 90.
We'll have to do it, 99. Right, get you back for the one before.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, mate.
Love that. Thank
Brilliant.
you.
Thank you.